Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. You've probably noticed that asking for a tip is becoming more and more common. If you made any recent in-store purchases, chances are you've had a little tablet spun in your direction that asked just how much you want to tip. And in certain industries, tipping is absolutely part of American culture. And it's hard to say it's part of the culture. It is, but for many of these workers, that tip is an essential portion of their pay. But recently, there's been a shift. More and more places are asking for tips. Places where tipping was quite rare, and a lot of consumers are getting annoyed. And let's hit the pause button for a moment, because there's certain areas in our society where you really have to tip. Think about those who are really in the service industry. Notably, waiters come to mind. In fact, for many servers, the federal minimum wage for tipped employees was set at $2.13 back in 1991. And it hasn't budged since then. For these employees, tips make up a huge portion of their pay. They actually make it so these employees could earn a decent wage. Without tips, the pay in these positions would be impossible. And paying tipped employees this low wage is standard in 43 of our 50 states. And there are other areas where tipping is pretty standard practice. Think maybe your hairdresser or barber, your housekeeper, bellman, valet. Because if you're handing over the keys to your $40,000 vehicle, you absolutely want to make sure that it's taken care of. But there's a common theme with all of these jobs, and is that these workers are providing a service to you, and you are tipping for that service. But during the pandemic, a shift began to take place. With so many businesses having to close their doors or offer limited services, their revenues really took a hit, and they started looking for a way to fill this gap, and that was to ask for tips. And during this time, a lot of us didn't mind giving extra here and there. We knew these businesses were struggling, and a lot of them were our favorite local joints, and we wanted to help them out through the hard times and ensure they didn't have to close their doors. But it seems like once they started asking for tips, a precedent was set, and now they're never gonna stop. And nowadays, a lot of places are asking for tips, even in places where it seems like you're kind of serving yourself. You go into Starbucks, you order a coffee, they ask how much you want to tip. You go into a fast food restaurant, they ask you how much you want to tip. When's the last time you tipped at a Taco Bell or a Panera? You walk up to the counter and then you wait for the food and then you take it to your own table. It just seems a little lost on me. Restaurants are asking for tips on takeout orders, and I find this one really hard because I got in my car. Scratch that, I didn't get in my car. I sent my husband. He got in his car, that's his time, his gas, and we're supposed to tip on that one? That one's kind of lost on me as well. Even specialty bakeries are asking for tips. My favorite dessert is a cookie, which is kind of hard to say as an adult because you can't really go to a restaurant and then finish your meal with a glass of milk and a cookie. It's just not an option. So once a month, I go to this overpriced cookie chain and I get a couple cookies. They're $5 a cookie. I know they're overpriced, the store knows they're overpriced, but they're delicious, so it's what we do. And then they have the audacity to ask for a tip. You put my 2 cookies in a box, charge me $10 and then want a tip? No thank you, ma'am. 100% I am going to hit no tip on that one. I might even look you in the eye as I push the button. But that brings us to that little tablet. There's a lot of psychology at play when it comes to you being handed a tablet asking for a tip. A lot of times the cashier will just be like, oh, it's just gonna ask you a quick question as they spin it towards you. You know exactly what that question is gonna be. How much do you want to tip? And these tablets will suggest a specific amount or a specific percentage, all with the goal of prompting you to tip more than you otherwise would have, or to tip in situations where you never otherwise would have. It's playing with your emotions. It's guilting you into tipping. Perhaps these establishments once had a tip jar that you could toss spare change into. That decision was a passive choice, but now they're making it an active choice. They're essentially asking you to consciously opt out of tipping if that's what you don't want to do, and in a rather public way, with the cashier watching you and perhaps a line of people behind you all watching what you're doing. And do you ever notice that most often you're given 3 choices for your tip amount? Again, this is psychology at play. When consumers are presented with 3 pricing options, they'll most often choose the middle option. Not the highest, not the lowest, but right in the middle. And where a 20% tip has often been considered a solid tip in the past, Many tablets nowadays, they start at 15 or 20% and go up from there. Often you'll see a 25 or a 30% option. And often these are in situations when there wasn't a whole lot of service at play. It was rather more a simple transaction. And more often than not, this tactic is working. Tips are overwhelmingly up in these establishments. In fact, one Starbucks worker said, with the introduction of tip screens, everything is different. And even though my tips have doubled, I feel really uncomfortable asking customers for more money. I don't have the kind of job where I'm reliant on tips to make a good living. On the other hand, we get a lot of tips now, so maybe it's worth the awkwardness for both the customer and the workers. It is worth noting that while the employee is the one spinning that little iPad in your direction, they're not the ones who set up that prompt. It was the business owner. And you can't fault the employee for one, doing their job, or two, benefiting from an environment that encourages excessive tipping. And it's not just the increasing number of establishments that are asking for tips making headlines. It's also what is being dubbed as tipflation, combining tip and inflation, and it is the increase in the amount that is being asked for as a tip. When tipping was first introduced, 10% was considered standard. Then over time, it crept up to 15%. And nowadays, I feel like 20% is standard. I would say the vast majority of people these days are in that 15 to 20% range. I think anything near the 10% end of the spectrum is often seen as insulting. But nowadays, many of these tablets have 20% as the starting option or the middle option, which means that there's one or two options higher, and often that's 25 or 30%. Again, this is creating a new mental anchor for us, and it's driving us to tip more. And it certainly depends on the situation and the service being provided, and maybe it's totally warranted. But I just want you to be aware of what is happening, because with time, perhaps 25% becomes the norm. But it does kind of lead you to believe there's got to be some sort of mental ceiling when it comes to tipping. Like, I can't imagine that we're going to get to a point where we're traditionally tipping 40 or 50%, right? So if you're experiencing tipping fatigue, know that you're not alone. And if your budget is running really tight, know that you don't have to tip in all situations. Not every transaction requires a tip, especially when much of these services are self-services. You might just have to train yourself to hit that no tip button when that tablet is spun your way. And seriously, hit it completely guilt-free and then go on to enjoy your overpriced cookie. When it comes to those traditional service industries, make sure you're tipping. These establishments and these workers are in no way the subject of this video. Remember that these workers are providing a service to you. And also remember that their pay structure is highly dependent on them earning tips in order to earn a livable wage. So my attitude with this group is be generous. I just think it's incredibly important to note that there's a big distinction between a server at a restaurant and a cashier at a store. Their pay structure is entirely different, and the service they're providing is entirely different. So even though you may feel the social pressure to tip in these situations, only do so if one, you have the means to do so, and two, it's a situation that actually warrants a tip. So many people are already living paycheck to paycheck. Inflation hit everyone hard. So if you have to start paying 20 to 30% more on top of already inflated prices every time you walk into an establishment, it's going to start to cut into the number of things you can actually go do. So tip when you want to, tip when you want to be generous, but shrug off that social pressure and the guilt of feeling like you have to tip. Because this is your money. You work hard for it and you shouldn't be guilted into spending it. Be intentional with your dollars. What do you guys think of our new tipping culture? Leave your answer in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye.